Life in Haven moved differently. We shopped at stalls where people knew your name after the second visit. We fixed things instead of replacing them. We learned the rhythm of a place that didn't watch your every step, and slowly the fear bled out of the walls. When Nova was born, her first sound wasn't drowned by the hum of a city grid. It was carried on the wind through an open window. She had Alice's eyes and a grip that could crush your finger if you weren't careful. 2 years later, I still caught myself watching the sky sometimes, expecting a drone. None ever came. Haven wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And that was enough. 2 years in Haven had a way of making Solara feel like a fever dream, too bright, too loud, too poison to be real. But then, every so often, a whisper from the city found its way here. The latest came through Ann, the only person from my old life I still trusted. She arrived at our door with a basket of bread and a grin she tried, and failed to hide. "Alara's been cut from the Solstice Gala guest list," she said, dropping onto my couch like she'd just run a victory lap. Rainer Energy's stock dipped 12 points after someone leaked what she did to allies. The board's calling it a values crisis. I didn't ask who leaked it. Haven taught me not to waste energy on questions when the answer didn't change the outcome. Allies was at her boutique when I told her. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just adjusted a display of woven shawls and said, "It's not revenge, it's gravity. She made her choices, now she's living with the weight of them." I realized she was right. We hadn't needed to shout, post, or burn bridges publicly. All we'd done was live well outside her reach, and the silence had done the rest. Without an audience to perform for, her empire of image had crumbled on its own. That fall, Allies' shop expanded to the unit next door. She painted the words, "Family is who shows up," in gold across the front window. On opening day, Nova, now walking and talking with the precision of a tiny general, sat behind the counter with a coloring book, handing out paper flowers she'd made to every customer. Ann leaned over and whispered, "Think they'll ever set foot here?" I looked out at the sunlit street, at neighbors stopping to chat, at Nova giggling, as she stuck a paper flower in an old man's jacket pocket. "If they do," I said, "they'll know exactly where they stand. Sometimes justice isn't a slam of the gavel. It's the sound of a door you never reopen. It's a name you never speak again. It's a life so full they can't touch it, can't rewrite it, can't claim it as theirs." And in the quiet of Haven, that silence was louder than any victory parade Solara could have given me. I was just about to lock the shutters when my door's biometric seal flickered from green to amber, unauthorized override attempt. It blinked twice, then the lock cycled open with a sharp click. I grabbed the wrench from my workbench and stepped into the hall. Standing in the open doorway was a figure in a charcoal coat, dripping rain onto the floor. Orrin Wynn, my father, the man who hadn't spoken to me since I left the Rainer orbit 7 years ago. "Cass," he said, voice level like he was here on business. "Breaking into my apartment now?" I asked. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, carrying a thin case under his arm. "I came to stop you before this goes any further." "You mean before Allies gets to keep her child?" His jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic. Alara's made arrangements. The child will be placed in a family who can give it security. And you," he set the case on my table, "will have your debts cleared, plus a maintenance stipend for the year." I stared at the case, knowing without opening it that it was full of contracts, not cash. "You think you can buy me off?" "I think you're tired," he said. "You've always had a streak for defiance, Cass, but this is suicide. You can't fight her. Maybe not on her terms." He sighed like he'd rehearsed it, reached for the door, then paused. "Don't confuse stubbornness with loyalty. Allies' made her bed." "No," I said quietly. "Alara made it for her and you tucked her in." The door shut behind him, but the air in the apartment still felt invaded. 2 days later, the real breach came. It was late, Allies in the shower, steam curling under the bathroom door. My wrist pad pinged, a connection I hadn't approved. The kitchen speaker flickered to life, voice spilling into the room. She's still there. No, she hasn't talked to a lawyer. She's just playing hero. It was Erin, a friend I'd known since training days at the solar grid plant. Someone I'd let in without question. She's emotional, Erin went on. Solara, you know how she gets. If we wait, she'll slip. My chest went cold. I shut the connection down and stepped into the kitchen just as Erin ended her call, mug in hand like nothing had happened. Who were you talking to? I asked. She didn't blink. Someone trying to fix this mess. You mean my mother? Erin's smile thinned. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. You can't protect her forever. Maybe not forever, I said, but long enough to make sure you're nowhere near her when she doesn't need protection anymore. She left without another word. The door closed. This time I triple locked it. It was the first calm morning we'd had in weeks. No drones outside. No new smear articles on my feed. Allies even managed a small smile over burnt toast, teasing me about my war crime coffee. By noon, the calm shattered. I found her in the hallway, doubled over, one hand braced on the wall, the other gripping her belly like she was trying to hold the world in place. Her face was pale, lips trembling, sweat already beading along her hairline. I'm fine, she breathed, but her knees buckled before the words finished. I didn't argue. The go bag I'd packed weeks ago was already by the door. In minutes we were in my solar skiff, cutting through midday traffic, the rain-slick streets reflecting the neon blaze of Solara's skyline. Every red light turned yellow in my favor. At Solara Central Medical, a swarm of medtechs took her in. I stayed at her side until they rolled her toward a private room. Then a nurse intercepted me with a tablet. Family authorization is pending from Rayner Medical Trust, she said. They've requested provisional decision-making rights in case of... No. The word was out before she finished. She frowned. They've already transferred a medical retainer. That gives them... It gives them nothing, I cut in. Revoke access now. Her hesitation told me exactly how much pull the Rayners had in this building. I leaned in. You're looking at the legal guardian of that patient. You override the system or I will, and I promise you my way will leave scorch marks. A flicker of fear crossed her face. She keyed something into the tablet, and the Rayner access request disappeared from the screen. Hours later, Allies was stable but confined to bed for the remainder of the pregnancy. The doctors said the contractions had been triggered by stress. When I stepped into the hallway, Solara was there. Not in person. Her face filled the comm screen on the wall outside Allies' room, projection crisp as if she were standing inches away. Cass, she said, voice dripping mock concern. You've made this harder than it needs to be. Let me take it from here. You mean take her from here. She's my daughter. That child is. Not your brand asset, I snapped, and not up for negotiation. Her gaze hardened. If you won't cooperate, you'll be forced to. The feed cut. I stood there, the hum of the hospital lights buzzing in my skull. This wasn't a threat she tossed over wine at a gala. This was a declaration of war, made in the one place Allies was most vulnerable. And it was the moment I realized I wasn't just protecting her anymore. I was going to dismantle the hold the Rayners thought they had over both of us. 2 days in that hospital room taught me one thing. Solara wouldn't wait much longer. Every visitor request that came through the system had Rayner fingerprints on it. Courier drones hovered outside Allies' window by mistake. Even the cafeteria cashier slipped and called me by my full name when I hadn't used in public for years. We were already surrounded. The morning of the 3rd day, I sat in the hospital cafe with a single credit chip in my pocket and a decision I'd been avoiding. Inside that chip was the access code to my heritage kit, a precision solar calibration set passed down from my grandfather. The only thing I'd kept from the win line after walking away from the Rayners. Selling it felt like cutting off the last thread to my old life. But threads can strangle you if you hold them too long. I found a broker in the undergrid market, no questions asked, cash in hand. Enough to buy passage on a skyrunner out of Solara, change our identities on the outer rim, and cover a few months' rent somewhere Alara's influence thinned to nothing. I didn't tell allies. Not yet. She needed rest, not a countdown clock. Instead, I sat by her bed that night, scrolling listings for the Haven district, a free zone built in the shadow of the old solar farms, too small and unprofitable for corporate control. No Rainer ads, no drones, just quiet sky. I booked us a duplex under a false name and a departure slot with a runner who owed me a favor. We'd have one window, 40 minutes between scheduled grid sweeps to leave the city unseen. Before I left the hospital that night, I sent one message to Alara. No preamble, no greeting. She'll grow up where you can't find her, and she'll never carry your name. I didn't wait for a reply. Her silence would be answer enough. We left Solara in the hour before dawn, when the city's pulse was weakest. The Skyrunner's engine hummed low, a stealth frequency that made the air vibrate in my teeth. Allies sat beside me, bundled in a hooded thermal, one hand resting over the curve of her belly. She didn't ask where we were going. She didn't need to. Solara shrank beneath us, its towers, its endless neon, its choking lattice of drones, all fading into a smear of light in the rear display. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders drop. The Haven district wasn't much to look at from above. A patchwork of repurposed solar fields, low-rise housing, and open sky. No corporate banners. No advertisements pulsing on every wall. Just sunlit metal and green stretching farther than I could see. Our duplex sat at the edge of an old maintenance yard. 2 floors, a small fenced garden, windows that actually opened. The rent chip was already transferred when we landed. No paperwork, no biometric scans, just a handshake from the landlord and a spare set of keys. Allies walked through the front door slow, like she was afraid it would vanish if she moved too fast. Her eyes caught on the rocking chair I'd ordered ahead of time, sitting by the window. The light from the solar field spilled across the floor, warm and clean. "This one feels safe," she murmured. "It is," I said, "and it's ours." The city never truly slept in 2075, but my block in the lower Solara district came close. The air hummed faintly with the static of solar grids winding down for the night. I was halfway through calibrating a defective battery cell at my workbench when the knock came. 3 times. Pause. 3 more. Not the lazy, neighborly knock of someone asking to borrow sugar. This was sharp, urgent. Through the reinforced glass of my apartment door, the acid rain blurred everything into shifting shadows. I pulled up the security feed on my wristpad and froze. Allies. I hadn't seen my cousin in 5 years. Not since the Rainer family decided my refusal to work for their corporation made me a liability to the brand. Now she stood in the downpour, her coat too thin for a Solara storm, hood slipping back to reveal hair plastered to her cheeks. Her face was pale, lips trembling, not just from cold, and beneath the soaked fabric, unmistakable, the curve of a pregnancy. I popped the seal and yanked the door open, the storm shoving its way in like it had a personal vendetta. She staggered over the threshold, water pooling instantly on the floor. "Cass!" Her voice cracked halfway through my name. I grabbed the thermal blanket from the wall hook and wrapped it around her, the smart fabric warming instantly against her chilled skin. She clutched it with both hands, as if afraid I might take it back. That's when my wristpad vibrated. A message from Alara Rainer, Allies' mother, CEO of the Rainer Energy Empire, and the woman who had frozen me out of the family years ago. "Alara, don't shelter her. If you do, you're finished with this family officially." 12 words, delivered like a court sentence. Allies saw my face before I could hide it. "She knows I'm here, doesn't she?" I nodded once. She had a head start, and just like that, I knew. Letting her stay meant stepping into a fight I couldn't win by playing nice. But looking at her, soaked, shivering, alone, there wasn't a choice to make. I locked the door. She didn't touch the tea I'd set in front of her. The steam curled between us, disappearing into the stale apartment air as allies stared at a crack in the tabletop, her knuckles white beneath the blanket. "It started 3 nights ago," she said finally, voice low like she was confessing to something dangerous. I leaned back, letting her set the pace. In Solara, stories told too quickly tended to be used against you. I got a message from her, no greeting, no explanation. Just Sky Dome, level 48, midnight. I knew the place. The Rayner family's private glass atrium floating above the skyline like it didn't believe in weather or gravity. Meetings there weren't for business, they were for verdicts. When I arrived, she was already sitting at the table. Allies went on, in that ivory jumpsuit she wears when she wants to look untouchable. No father. No board members, just her and the lights of the city behind her like she owned every watt of it. Allies' hands tightened on the blanket. She didn't even ask me to sit, just said I had 2 choices. Her eyes lifted to mine, and I could see the hurt under the defiance. 1, sign the deletion order, wipe the baby's biometrics from the family registry, disappear, and never use the Rayner name again. 2, terminate the pregnancy. For the good of the brand. I felt my jaw lock. "And if you refused?" She smiled, Allies said, the word twisting in her mouth, and told me she'd already packed my bag. It hit me then Alara hadn't been reacting to news. She'd been waiting for it. She'd set the trap long before Allies walked into that room. She walked me to the edge of the Sky Dome balcony. Allies continued, voice steady but quiet. Handed me the duffel. Said if you want to play house with your mistake, do it off my grid. Then she reset the door code. I could picture it, the rain streaking down the glass, the city glowing below, and Alara's silhouette blocking the way back in. She didn't even watch me leave, Allies whispered. She just turned away. The thermal blanket's heating coils pulsed faintly against my skin. I realized I'd been gripping its edge without noticing. "She thinks she's finished this," I said, the words more for me than for her, but she just moved the fight to my ground. By morning, the city already knew. Not the truth, of course. Solara never ran on truth. It ran on curated feeds and paid trends. My wristpad lit up with headlines pushed by anonymous accounts. Cass Wynn harboring Rayner defector. Pregnant heiress refuses family mediation, goes into hiding. The phrasing was careful, calculated to make allies sound unstable and me complicit. None of it mentioned the real ultimatum. By noon, I noticed the first drone. Matte black, hovering 2 stories up, its lens fixed on my window like it had nowhere else to be. An hour later, there were 2. "They're just watching," I told allies. "For now." But I knew better. Rayner drones never just watched. They mapped patterns, logged visitors, scanned heat signatures. That afternoon, the door chime sounded. I checked the cam feed and nearly didn't open it. Vera Locke stood there, Alara's communications chief. The woman could spin a hurricane into a light breeze and sell tickets for the ride. She wore a smile that was just short of sincere, holding a sleek white case. "I thought I'd drop off a few things for the baby," she said sweetly. Against my better judgment, I let her in. The case opened to reveal soft-knit swaddles, a biometric bottle warmer, and a set of booties so new they still smelled of synth fabric. Allies' eyes softened for a fraction of a second, until Vera slid a manila folder from her bag and placed it on the table like a winning hand. "It's just information," she cooed. "A private adoption. No courts, no scandal. Your child would have every opportunity and you'd avoid unnecessary hardship." Allies' hands went rigid around the blanket. "This is my child," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Vera didn't flinch. "It's also your future. Think carefully." I stepped forward, picked up the folder, and tore it clean in half. The sound was loud in the small room. You can tell Alara this, not in my home, not on my grid. Vera's eyes cooled, the mask slipping for just a heartbeat before she stood. You're making a mistake, Cass. Funny, I said, walking her to the door. I was just thinking the same about you. When the door sealed behind her, allies whispered, She's not going to stop, is she? I glanced at the hovering drones outside. No, she's just getting started. The rain came early that night, tapping against the window like static fingers. Allies was in the back room, humming softly to herself, while folding the same set of baby clothes for the third time that day.